Orc warrior hid to watch over his paralyzed son, until he saw what a human servant did. There are warriors who survive 1,000 battles without a scratch. Warriors whose names make enemies flee before the first sword is drawn. Warriors who carry the weight of victory like it's nothing. Grakar Ironhide was one of those warriors. But on the day he returned home to find his son broken, he learned something that no battlefield had ever taught him. Some fights can't be won with strength. Some enemies can't be defeated with rage. And sometimes the person you need most is the one you'd never think to ask for help. This is the story of a legendary orc warrior who hid in the shadows of his own home, watching a human servant do what he couldn't, make his paralyzed son smile again. And what he discovered would shatter everything he thought he knew about what it meant to be strong. The gates of Grimfang Hold opened with the sound of iron scraping stone, a sound that usually meant celebration, victory, warriors returning home with stories and scars to prove them. But when Grakar Ironhide rode through those gates, there was no celebration waiting. He was the size of a problem that couldn't be ignored, the kind of problem that made horses reconsider their life choices, that left cracks in flagstones where he walked, that required doorways to be built twice as wide as normal just in case. His armor was decorated with enough skulls to start a small graveyard, and his axe had a name that translated roughly to the conversation ender in the common tongue. Grakar had been gone for 6 months. 6 months fighting in the northern wastes, leading his warband against the frost giants who'd gotten too comfortable raiding orc territories. 6 months of blood and ice and the kind of violence that made songs afterward. He'd won. Obviously. Grakar always won. But victory felt strange in his mouth today, tasted like ash instead of glory. The hold was quiet, too quiet for midday. He could hear his warboar's heavy breathing, the creak of leather, the distant clang of a smith's hammer. But no children playing in the training yards, no warriors sparring and cursing each other's mothers, no signs of the life that usually filled these stone corridors. Something was wrong. Thorgrim the Loud appeared from the main hall. For a warrior whose defining characteristic was never speaking below a roar, he was walking very, very quietly. That's when Grakar knew, because Thorgrim only whispered, or tried to, when something was terrible. "Grakar," Thorgrim bellowed, then immediately winced and lowered his voice to what he probably thought was quiet, but sounded like a bear with laryngitis. "Grakar, you're back. We sent word. 3 riders. Did none of them reach you?" Grakar dismounted. The ground protested. "I came through the mountain pass. Faster." "What happened?" Thorgrim's face, scarred by 40 years of warfare, marked with the tattoos of a dozen victories, looked suddenly old. "It's Korg, your son. There was an accident." The world tilted, just slightly. Just enough that Grakar had to plant his feet wider to keep standing. "Where is he?" "The healing chambers." "But Grakar, you need to understand." Grakar was already moving. When an orc warrior his size decides to move with purpose, walls become suggestions and doors become temporary obstacles. He crossed the courtyard in seconds, burst through the entrance to the healing wing hard enough that the hinges screamed, and followed the smell of healing herbs and bandages to the chamber at the end. What he found there stopped him like a giant's fist to the chest. Korg was 8 years old. 8 years of energy and noise and the kind of chaos that only small orcs could create. 8 years of learning to hold a practice sword, of climbing things he shouldn't, of asking questions that had no good answers. But the Korg lying on that bed wasn't moving. His eyes were open. He was breathing. But his body was completely, utterly still. Broken Tusk, the clan's healer, rose from his stool beside the bed. The old orc's right tusk was missing, a reminder of the one patient he couldn't save, which had been himself when he was young and stupid. The irony of being the best healer despite his own mark of failure wasn't lost on anyone. "Chief," Broken Tusk said quietly. "He's awake. He can see, hear, speak, but his body..." The healer's hands moved in a helpless gesture. "The fall damaged something in his spine. I've tried everything. Every herb, every technique, every prayer to the ancestors. He can't move from the neck down." Grakar moved to the bedside like he was walking through water. Everything felt thick, slow, wrong. Korg's eyes found his father's face. The boy's expression did something complicated. Relief and shame and joy and sorrow, all tangled together in a way that no 8-year-old should have to feel. "Papa," Korg whispered. "You came back." Grakar knelt. The stone floor cracked under his weight. He wanted to scoop his son into his arms, lift him up the way he used to when Korg was smaller. Wanted to hear the boy's laugh, feel his small arms trying to wrap around his father's massive neck. But he couldn't, because Korg couldn't hold on anymore. "What happened?" Gregor's voice came out wrong. Too rough, even for an orc. Korg's eyes were starting to water, but he fought it the way young warriors do, by pretending it wasn't happening. "I was climbing. The watchtower. The one you told me not to climb until I was bigger. Of course. Of course it was the watchtower. I wanted to see if I could see where you were, if maybe I could spot your warband coming home." The tears were winning now. I got really high, almost to the top, and then, I don't remember. I woke up here, and I couldn't move, and you weren't here. That last part was a knife. The kind that goes in quiet and hurts worse than the loud ones. Gregor reached out, placed his massive hand next to his son's much smaller one. Korg's fingers didn't curl to meet his. Couldn't. The boy's hand just lay there, lifeless despite the life still in his eyes. "I'm here now," Gregor said, and even he could hear how empty it sounded. Here now, after 6 months away, after his son had climbed a tower trying to see him coming home, after the fall, after everything. Too late was what he meant. He was here now, but it was too late. Broken Tusk cleared his throat. "There's someone who's been helping, with Korg's care, the human girl, Ilara." Gregor's head snapped up. "A human? Caring for my son?" She volunteered, when she heard what happened. The healer shrugged. "She's been patient, good with him, keeps him clean, helps him eat, talks to him so he doesn't go mad from the silence. A human, taking care of his son, because Gregor hadn't been there. Where is she now? Kitchens, probably. Mara Softhand, the cook. She's been teaching the girl to make the bone broth that Korg can actually swallow without choking." Gregor stood. The movement was too fast, too violent. He was angry, though he couldn't have said exactly at what. At himself for being gone, at the frost giants for existing, at the watchtower for being climbable, at the world for breaking his son while he was off winning battles that suddenly felt meaningless. "I'll take care of him now," Gregor said. "The human can return to her other duties." Broken Tusk and Korg exchanged a look. It was brief, but Gregor saw it, saw the worry in it. "Papa," Korg said quietly. "Ilara is nice. She doesn't look at me like I'm broken." Gregor wanted to say that he didn't look at Korg like he was broken either, but he couldn't make the words come out because he wasn't sure if they'd be true. Over the next 3 days, Gregor tried. He stayed by his son's bedside, trying to do what the human girl had apparently been doing, trying to be patient. But patience wasn't a skill they taught warriors. He tried to feed Korg the bone broth, but his hands were too large, too rough. He spilled more than made it to the boy's mouth. Tried to adjust Korg's position to prevent bed sores, but was terrified of hurting him, of being too rough, of breaking something that was already broken. Tried to talk to him, but every word felt wrong. What do you say to a son who will never hold a sword, never run, never become the warrior you'd always assumed he'd be? The wooden training stick Gregor had carved when Korg was born sat in the corner of the room. He'd made it from iron oak, spent 3 nights shaping it perfectly for small hands that would grow into warrior hands. It was supposed to be Korg's first weapon. Now it just sat there, accusing him. On the 4th day, Gregor made a decision that felt like surrender. He told Korg he needed to attend to clan matters, which was true. He told himself he'd be more useful helping lead the hold, which was maybe true. He told himself that the human girl was already doing a good job, so why interfere? Which was definitely a lie he told himself to feel better about failing. But he didn't leave. Not really. Instead, Gregor began to watch from the shadows. Literally. The healing chambers had observation alcoves, places where healers could monitor patients without being intrusive. They were designed for orcs, which meant they were large enough for even Gregor to hide in if he was very still and very quiet. He started spending his days there, hidden, watching, waiting to see what this human servant was doing that he couldn't. The first time he saw Ilara Thornwood, she was humming. She was smaller than most humans, the kind of small that made orcs instinctively check where they were walking so they didn't step on her by accident. Her hair was the color of old copper, tied back in a practical braid that had clearly given up any pretense of neatness sometime around dawn. She wore the simple brown dress of a servant, patched in 3 places and stained with what looked like soup and herbs and hope. She entered Korg's chamber carrying a bowl of broth and a pile of clean linens, still humming that strange little melody. Not a war song, not even a proper song, really. Just sound. the kind of sound that filled empty spaces. "Good morning, young master," she said in the common tongue, which most orcs understood even if they refused to speak it out of principle. Kor's face lit up, actually lit up in a way it hadn't when Grakar had been trying to care for him. "Ilara, you're back. Did you think I'd abandon you to Broken Tusk's terrible jokes?" She set down the bowl and linens, then pulled up the stool with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. "He was here earlier telling me that thing about the orc and the chicken again. I'm starting to think he only knows one joke." Kor giggled. The sound hit Grakar like an arrow between the ribs. Ilara began the morning routine. She moved with efficiency, but not speed, checking Kor's position, adjusting pillows, examining his skin for pressure sores with gentle fingers. "Arms look good today," she narrated as she worked. "No new marks. That salve Broken Tusk made is working beautifully." She shifted a pillow under Kor's left shoulder. "How does that feel? Better? Worse? Want me to move it?" "Better," Kor said. What struck Grakar, what made him lean forward slightly in his hiding place, was how she asked, like Kor's opinion mattered, like he had choices, even if his body didn't obey him. She picked up the broth bowl and a carved wooden spoon. "Mara outdid herself today. This broth has actual flavor. I think she might have put in spices by accident. Revolutionary." Kor laughed again. "You're silly. I'm practical," Ilara corrected, bringing a spoonful to his lips. "There's a difference. Silly would be if I tried to juggle the broth. Practical is making you smile while I feed you something that tastes like boiled sadness." She fed him slowly, patiently. When he needed to pause, she paused. When some dribbled down his chin, she wiped it away without fuss, without making him feel ashamed. Grakar had spilled half the bowl, had made his son feel like a burden. This human made it look easy. "Tell me a story," Kor said between spoonfuls. "What kind of story?" "One where someone is brave." Ilara's hand paused just for a moment. Then she continued feeding him, her voice taking on that quality people use when they're telling tales. "Once there was a young orc who climbed a very tall tower, trying to see his father coming home from war." Kor's eyes widened. "That's my story." "It is. And do you know what makes it a brave story?" "I fell." "That's not brave, that's stupid. Papa said never climb the tower." "You fell," Ilara agreed, not sugarcoating it. "And yes, it was dangerous, and you shouldn't have done it. But here's the thing about bravery, Kor. Brave isn't about never falling. It's about what you do after you fall." She set down the spoon and looked him straight in the eyes. In the shadows, Grakar felt something twist in his chest. "You fell," she continued, "and your body stopped working the way you wanted, and you could have given up. Could have decided you were done, that life was over, that nothing mattered anymore. But you didn't. You're still here, still fighting to get stronger every day, still smiling, still joking, still being you. That's brave, Kor. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." Kor's lip trembled. "But I can't do anything. Can you breathe?" "Yes." "Can you think?" "Yes." "Can you talk to me right now?" "Yes." "Then you can do 3 very important things. Most warriors can swing swords, Kor. Very few can keep smiling when everything hurts. You're learning a kind of strength your father's warband will never understand." In his alcove, Grakar felt those words land like blows. The human girl continued Kor's care. She exercised his arms, the only part of his body with some feeling, moving them gently through ranges of motion to keep the muscles from completely atrophying. "One day," she said as she worked, "we're going to get you sitting up, then maybe standing, with support. Then maybe, just maybe, walking. Even if we have to build you a frame to lean on. Even if it takes years, we'll get there." "You really think so?" "I think giving up is easier than trying. And I think you're not the type to choose easy." She told him stories while she worked, about her own childhood in a human village, about learning to be a servant in an orc hold, about the time she accidentally seasoned Thorgrim's stew with soap instead of salt, and he was too polite, or too loud to notice, to mention it. She made Kor laugh, made him forget, just for moments, that he couldn't move, and Grakar, hiding in the shadows, watched every moment of it, watched this human servant do what he, a legendary warrior, could not. Make his son believe in something other than defeat. Every day he told himself he would step out, would announce himself, would thank her, dismiss her, take over the care himself. Every day he stayed hidden, because every day he saw his son smile, and he knew that if he took over, those smiles would disappear. After 2 weeks of watching, Grakar noticed something. Ilara was teaching core exercises for the parts of his body that still worked. His shoulders had some movement. His neck could turn. His jaw could clench. She made it into a game. "Strongest jaw wins," she'd announce, placing a small strip of leather between his teeth. "Bite down. Hold it. Don't let me pull it away." Core would bite down, and she'd gently tug, and he'd hold on with everything he had, building jaw strength, creating small victories where victories were scarce. 7 seconds today, she'd crow, like he'd just won a battle. Yesterday was only 5. "You're getting stronger, warrior." Warrior. She called him warrior, even though he couldn't hold a weapon. One afternoon, Mara's soft hand visited the healing chamber. The old cook, who hummed constantly while working and claimed it made the bread rise better, brought fresh bread and soup. "Child," Mara said to Ilara in the common tongue, "you haven't slept properly in days." "I'm fine. You're exhausted. I can see it. Let someone else take a shift." He doesn't like the others. They treat him like he's broken. "He is broken, dear." Ilara's voice went quiet, fierce. "His body is injured. He is not broken. There's a difference." Mara sighed, but she was smiling. "You have your mother's stubbornness. She'd be proud of what you're doing here." After Mara left, Core asked, "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "Take care of me. You're a servant. You could be doing easier things." Ilara was quiet for a moment. "When I was your age, I got very sick. Fever so high I couldn't think, couldn't barely breathe. My mother, she was a healer in our village. She sat with me for 6 days and nights. Didn't sleep. Just kept putting cool cloths on my forehead, making me drink water, telling me stories to keep me awake because she was afraid if I slept I wouldn't wake up. She adjusted Core's blanket. I asked her later why she didn't just let someone else do it. Why she exhausted herself. You know what she said?" Core shook his head. She said, "Because you needed me, and love doesn't get to be convenient." Ilara smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. "You remind me that the best thing my mother ever taught me was that caring for someone isn't a burden. It's a privilege." From the shadows, Grakar felt something break open in his chest. This human understood something he didn't. Something about what it meant to be there for someone, not because it was glorious or easy, but because they needed you. That night, after Ilara finally left to get some sleep, Grakar sat beside his son's bed. Core was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Papa?" The boy sounded surprised. "I didn't know you were here. I've been nearby." It wasn't quite a lie. "Watching over you. Ilara says I'm getting stronger." "She's right. Do you think so? Or are you just saying that because you're supposed to?" The question gutted him. When had his son learned to doubt him? When had the space between them grown so wide that honesty felt dangerous? Grakar looked at the training stick in the corner, then back at his son. "I think," he said slowly, "that I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be what you need. I know how to fight, how to lead warriors, how to win battles. But sitting here, watching you hurt in ways I can't fix, I don't know how to win this Core. And it terrifies me." It was the most honest thing he'd said in months. Core's eyes were shining. "I'm terrified too. What are you afraid of? That you'll stop loving me because I can't be a warrior like you." The words were a blade through Grakar's heart. Straight through, clean, devastating. "Core, I know what I was supposed to be, what you wanted. The training stick is right there. You made it for me, and now I'll never use it." Grakar moved to the corner, picked up the stick. It was lighter than he remembered. Perfectly balanced. Made for hands that would never hold it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at his son. "I made this," Grakar said, "because I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought it looked like me, like swinging weapons and winning fights and never being afraid." He moved back to the bedside, set the stick down beside Core. "But I've been watching Ilara care for you, watching you fight to smile even when everything is hard, and I'm starting to think I was wrong about what strength is." "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe strength isn't just about what you can do with your body. Maybe it's about what you refuse to let break inside you." He placed his massive hand carefully next to Core's again. "You can't move, but you haven't given up. That's stronger than anything I've done in battle." "Really?" "Really. And I'm sorry, Core. Sorry I wasn't here when you fell. Sorry I didn't know how to help when I got back. Sorry I've been hiding instead of sitting with you." "You've been hiding?" Grakar almost smiled. "Yes, like a coward. Watching from alcoves. Letting a human servant be braver than me. Ilara isn't a coward. And she's not just a servant. She's my friend." Something clicked into place in Grakar's mind. A realization that had been building for weeks. His son needed help, needed care, needed someone patient and kind and willing to sit with him in the hard moments, and Grakar could learn to be that person. But right now, Kor needed Alara. And Grakar's pride, his warrior's pride that said he should be able to handle everything alone, was getting in the way of what his son actually needed. She is your friend, Grakar agreed. And I need to stop hiding. I need to learn from her. Learn what? How to be the father you need. Not the father I thought you needed. The one you actually need right now. Kor was quiet for a moment. Then, can Alara keep helping? Yes. And can you be here too? Yes, I promise. No more hiding. For the first time since coming home, Grakar saw real hope in his son's eyes. The next morning, when Alara arrived for her usual routine, she found Grakar sitting beside Kor's bed. Not hiding. Not pretending to be busy elsewhere. Just sitting. She froze in the doorway, bowl of broth in hand, clearly uncertain if she was about to be dismissed. Alara Thornwood, Grakar said in his rough common tongue. Yes, Chief? I've been watching you. For 2 weeks. Her eyes widened. I didn't know. I'm sorry if I've done something wrong. You've done everything right. The words came hard, but they came. Everything I couldn't do, and I need to ask you something. Anything. Teach me. Alara blinked. Teach you what? How to care for my son the way you do. How to be patient. How to make him smile. How to... He struggled with the words. How to be what he needs. The human servant stood there, bowl in hand, processing the fact that a legendary orc warrior was asking her, a servant, a human, barely into her 20s, to teach him how to be a father. Chief Grakar, she said slowly, I would be honored. And so began the strangest apprenticeship in the history of Grimfang Hold. A warrior learning patience from a servant. An orc learning gentleness from a human. A father learning that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. Alara showed him how to position Kor to prevent sores, how to feed him without spilling, how to exercise his arms and shoulders, how to tell stories that made the time pass faster. But more than technique, she taught him something harder. She taught him to see Kor not as broken, but as changing. Not as what he'd lost, but as what he still had. Talk to him like he's still himself, she said one day as they worked together. Because he is. His body changed, but Kor is still Kor. Grakar tried. At first it felt forced, artificial, but slowly, day by day, he learned to see it. His son's humor, his curiosity, his stubbornness, inherited directly from his father, though Grakar had never noticed before. One afternoon, 3 weeks after Grakar had stopped hiding, Kor surprised them both. I felt something, he said suddenly. Grakar and Alara both looked up. Where? Alara asked. My leg, my right leg, just a tingle, but I felt it. Broken Tusk was summoned immediately. The old healer examined Kor carefully, professionally, his one remaining tusk gleaming as he concentrated. Nerve damage isn't always permanent, he said finally. Sometimes the body heals itself, very slowly, over months, even years. It's possible. He didn't finish the sentence, but the hope hung in the air like smoke. Possible. Not certain. Not promised. But possible. Over the next month, the tingles became more frequent. Then became movement. Tiny, almost imperceptible movement. A toe wiggling, a knee bending slightly, an ankle rotating an inch. Alara designed exercises. Grakar built supports, carefully, patiently, measuring 3 times before cutting, because this work required precision that battle axes didn't. Kor worked harder than any warrior in training. Every day, pushing his body to remember how to obey. Failing more often than succeeding. Crying from frustration some days, but never giving up. 6 months after Grakar had returned home, something impossible happened. Kor stood up, not alone, not without help. Grakar held him under one arm, Alara under the other, and Broken Tusk had built a wooden frame for support. The training stick, repurposed now as a walking aid, was clutched in Kor's hands. His legs shook. His whole body trembled with effort. He could only stand for 30 seconds before exhausting himself. But he stood. Thorgrim the Loud, watching from the doorway, didn't shout for once. He just stood there, tears running down his scarred face, silent for maybe the first time in his life. Mara Softhand stopped humming her endless lullabies and just smiled, her hands folded over her heart. Even Broken Tusk, who had seen many healings in his long life, looked moved. But the real moment, the one that Grakar would remember for the rest of his life, was when Kor looked up at him from his shaking stance and said, Look, Papa, I'm a warrior. Just a different kind. Grakar, who had never cried on a battlefield, who had faced death 100 times without flinching, felt tears running down his face. Yes, he managed to say, the best kind. That night, after Kor had been carefully settled back into bed and had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Grakar found Ilara in the kitchens helping Mara clean up. May I speak with you? He asked. Ilara looked nervous. Of course, Chief. They walked to the courtyard, where the evening air was cool and the stars were just beginning to appear. I wanted to thank you, Grakar said, for everything you've done, for my son, for me. You don't need to thank me, I do. He cut her off gently. Because you saved him, not just his body, his spirit. You gave him hope when I was ready to accept defeat. You saw strength in him when I only saw loss. Ilara looked down. I just did what anyone would do. No, you did what most wouldn't. You looked at an orc child, a child of the species that probably enslaved your people, that humans fear, and you saw someone worth saving, worth caring for, worth your time and exhaustion and tears. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. In orc culture, we have a concept, Keshatha. It means life debt. When someone saves you in a way that cannot be repaid, you acknowledge them as family, not by blood, by choice. Ilara's eyes widened. Kor calls you friend, but I want you to know, Ilara Thornwood, that you are Keshatha to this family. You are family, not servant, family, and nothing will change that. The human girl, this small, tired, wonderful human girl who had taught a warrior how to be a father, started crying. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll stay. Keep helping Kor. Keep teaching me. Be part of this family you've already saved. Yes, I'll stay. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ilara asked quietly, Do you think he'll walk again? Really walk? I don't know, Grakar admitted. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he'll need the frame forever. Maybe he'll only ever walk a few steps. He looked up at the stars. But I've learned something these past months. I thought strength was about what you can do, how far you can walk, how hard you can fight, how much weight you can carry. But Kor has taught me it's about what you refuse to let break inside you. He'll walk or he won't. Either way, he's already stronger than I ever was. You're stronger than you think, Ilara said softly. I'm learning to be. Because of you. 1 year later, during the spring festival, something happened that made the entire hold stop and stare. Kor walked across the courtyard. Not perfectly. Not without the wooden frame for support. Not quickly. Each step was deliberate, careful, hard-won through hundreds of hours of work. But he walked. Ilara walked beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. Grakar walked on the other side, doing the same. The courtyard fell silent as they passed. Orcs who had written off the chief's son as doomed stood witnessing something they'd never expected to see. Thorgrim the Loud started clapping. Then others joined. Then the whole hold erupted in applause. Kor looked up at his father, grinning despite the sweat pouring down his face from the effort. Not bad for a broken orc, right? You were never broken, Grakar said. Just becoming something different, something better than I ever was. That night, the three of them, Grakar, Kor, and Ilara, sat together in the healing chamber that had become less of a sick room and more of a home. Tell me a story, Kor said, the same request he'd made a year ago. But this time, it was Grakar who answered. Once there was a legendary warrior who thought he knew everything about strength. Thought it meant never losing, never falling, never needing anyone. Sounds like a fool, Kor interjected with a smile. He was. The biggest fool in the hold. And then one day, his son fell from a tower. And the warrior learned that the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get back up. And the wisest warriors aren't the ones who never ask for help. They're the ones who find the right people to ask. Ilara was smiling now, too. And what happened to the warrior? Kor asked. He learned, slowly, painfully, with the help of a very patient human who was wiser than he'd ever be. He learned that family isn't just blood, that strength takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning a battle. It's being there for someone when they need you most. That's a good story, Kor said sleepily. It's a true one. As Kor drifted off to sleep, Grakar looked at the training stick, now a walking aid, leaning against the wall. It had become something different, something better, just like his son, just like himself. Ilara stood to leave to get some rest, but Grakar stopped her. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for showing me what I couldn't see. You would have figured it out, she said. Maybe, eventually. But you saved us time, saved us pain, saved us from giving up. He paused. You saved my son's life, and mine too, in a way that has nothing to do with breathing. Ilara smiled. That's what family does. And she was right, because that's exactly what they'd become. Not orc and human, not chief and servant, not warrior and healer, just family. The kind you choose, the kind that saves you. Months continued to pass, and Korg continued to improve. Some days were better than others. Some days he could walk 50 steps. Some days only 5. Some days the pain was so bad that all he could do was lie in bed and fight not to scream. But even on those days he smiled, because he had his father beside him, and he had Ilara, and he had hope. By his 10th birthday, Korg could walk across the entire courtyard without stopping. He still needed the frame, still moved slowly, still struggled on stairs, but he walked. And more importantly, he lived, really lived, laughed with the other young orcs in the hold, learned to read and write from Ilara, who insisted education was just as important as physical strength, started asking Broken Tusk about healing herbs, fascinated by the idea of helping others the way he'd been helped. One evening, Grakar found Korg in the library, a room that most warriors ignored, but that Korg had claimed as his own sanctuary. Reading again? Grakar asked. Learning, Korg corrected. There's a difference. Ilara says that knowledge is power too, just a different kind than swinging axes. Grakar sat down carefully in a chair that creaked under his weight. You spend a lot of time with books now. Is that bad? No, it's different. But different doesn't mean bad. I'm learning that. Korg closed the book he was reading, something about medicinal plants from the look of it. Papa, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you disappointed that I won't be a warrior like you? Grakar was quiet for a long moment. A year ago he might have lied, might have said the right thing without meaning it, but Ilara had taught him that honesty, real honesty, was part of love. I thought I would be, he said finally. When it first happened, I looked at you and saw everything I'd planned for you disappearing. Saw the warrior training, the battles, the glory. Saw it all vanishing. Korg's face fell slightly. But then, Grakar continued, I watched you fight a different kind of battle. Watched you refuse to give up when your own body was the enemy. Watched you work harder than any warrior I've ever trained just to stand up, just to take one step. He leaned forward, and I realized something. You're not becoming a different kind of orc than I wanted. You're becoming a better one. You're learning compassion, patience, how to heal instead of harm. Those are strengths I never had. Strengths our people desperately need. Really, I can train 100 warriors to swing swords, Korg. The clans have plenty of those. But a healer? Someone who understands what it's like to suffer and still chooses kindness. That's rare. That's valuable. That's you. Korg's eyes were shining. I want to help people. Like Broken Tusk. Like Ilara helped me. Then do it. Be a healer. Be a scholar. Be whatever you want. Just be yourself. And I will be proud. I am proud. Even though I'll never carry your axe into battle. Grakar smiled. Especially because you won't. You'll do something I could never do. You'll heal the wounds that warriors like me create. That conversation marked a shift. Korg stopped trying to be what he thought his father wanted and started becoming what he actually was. A young orc with a brilliant mind, a kind heart, and a healer's hands. Broken Tusk took him on as an apprentice, taught him everything about herbs, bones, healing techniques. Korg absorbed it all like dry earth absorbs rain, and Ilara continued to be part of their lives. Not as a servant anymore. Grakar had officially released her from those duties and given her a position as Korg's tutor and companion. She taught him human languages, human history, helped him understand perspectives beyond orc culture. She became, in every way that mattered, part of the family. 2 years after the accident, during a clan gathering, Thorgrim the Loud made an announcement that surprised everyone. I propose, he bellowed at a volume that probably reached the next territory, that we recognize Ilara Thornwood as Keshtha, life family to the Ironhide clan. The hall went silent. Recognizing a human as Keshtha was unprecedented, controversial. Some of the older warriors looked uncomfortable. But then Grakar stood. I second this proposal. Ilara Thornwood saved my son's life, saved my family, taught me what strength really means. She is family in all the ways that matter. Korg, now walking with just a simple cane instead of the full frame, stood as well. She's my teacher, my friend, my sister in everything but blood. I support this. The vote was called. Not everyone agreed. Change never comes easy, especially in orc culture. But enough agreed. More than enough. Ilara was officially recognized as Kesha to the Ironhide family. The ceremony was simple but profound. She was marked with a single orc tattoo, a small symbol on her wrist that meant family by choice, and given a place at the family table forever. She cried through the whole ceremony, happy tears, the kind that wash away old hurts and make room for new joys. That night, as the celebration continued in the Great Hall, Grakar found himself on the battlements, looking out over the territory he'd spent his life protecting. Ilara joined him, wrapped in a fur cloak against the evening chill. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for today, for everything. I'm the one who should be thanking you. You changed my life, changed my son's life. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes you extraordinary. You see what needs doing and you do it. No glory, no recognition expected. Just kindness." Grakar shook his head. "Warriors like me, we're trained to look for enemies, for threats, for battles to win. You taught me to look for something else, to look for people who need help, to look for ways to heal instead of hurt." Ilara smiled. "You learned fast, for a stubborn orc warrior. I had a good teacher, for a small human." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. "Kor wants to open a healing house," Ilara said eventually. "A place where anyone, orc or human or anyone else, can come for help. No questions asked, no payment required if they can't afford it. What do you think?" "I think it's the best idea I've ever heard. I think the world needs more healing and less fighting, and I think Kor is exactly the right person to do it. He'll need help. He'll have it. I'll help. You'll help. Broken Tusk will help. That's what family does." Grakar looked at her. This human who had walked into his life at his lowest moment and refused to let him drown in despair. This woman who had taught him that strength wasn't just about what you could destroy, but about what you could build, heal, and save. "You know," he said, "when you first started caring for Kor, I was angry. Angry that a human was doing what I couldn't. Angry that I needed help. Angry that my son preferred you to me. I never wanted to replace you. I know that now. You weren't replacing me. You were showing me how to be better, how to be present, how to actually see my son instead of just seeing my disappointments." He turned to face her fully. "Ilara Thornwood, I want you to know something. You are one of the finest warriors I have ever known. You fight different battles than I do, but you fight them with more courage, more skill, and more success than I've ever achieved on any battlefield." Ilara's eyes were wet. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's the truth. You saved my family, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're part of that family. Truly. Forever. I know," she whispered. "I've known for a while now. This is home. You and Kor. You're home." And she was right. Somehow, impossibly, wonderfully right. The years continued to pass. Kor's healing house opened when he was 15. A large building near the center of the hold, marked with symbols of peace and welcome. He wasn't fully healed himself. He still walked with a cane, still had days where the pain was overwhelming. But he helped others anyway, especially others who had been told they were broken, that they'd never heal, that they should give up. He never told them to give up. Ilara worked beside him, handling the administrative side, teaching young healers, and continuing to be the steady patient presence that had saved Kor all those years ago. And Grakar learned to set down his axe sometimes, learned that a chief's strength could be shown in ways that didn't involve violence. He mediated disputes with words instead of threats, built alliances with patience instead of intimidation, taught young warriors that mercy was strength, not weakness. Some of the old warriors grumbled that he'd gone soft, but most recognized something more important. He'd gone wise. On Kor's 18th birthday, Grakar gave him a gift, not the training stick, that still hung on the wall of Kor's room, a reminder of how far he'd come. Not a weapon, not armor, a book, hand-bound, filled with blank pages. "What's this?" Kor asked. "Your story," Grakar said. "The one you're still writing. I thought maybe it was time you wrote it down, not just for yourself, but for others who might need to hear it, who might need to know that falling doesn't mean failing, that being broken is just another word for changing, that strength comes in forms they never expected." Kor held the book like it was precious. "I don't know if I can. You can. You're the strongest person I know, and the world needs to hear from strong people." Over the next few years, Korg did write his story. Alara helped him shape it, edit it, make it readable. They copied it by hand, dozens of times, and distributed it to other holds, other territories, even to human settlements. The story of an orc who fell from a tower, who was told he'd never walk again, who refused to give up, who learned that strength isn't just about what your body can do, but about what your spirit refuses to let break. It became famous. Not in the way that battle songs become famous, but in a quieter, deeper way. Parents read it to children who were sick or hurt. Healers shared it with patients who had lost hope. Warriors who'd been injured in battle and thought their lives were over found new purpose in its pages. And always, at the end of the story, was a dedication to my father, who learned to be strong in a new way, and to Alara, who taught us both what real courage looks like. Grakar, reading it for the first time in private, cried, not from sadness, from pride, from joy, from the overwhelming gratitude of knowing that his son, his brilliant, resilient, beautiful son, had taken the worst moment of his life and turned it into something that helped others. That was strength. That was victory. That was everything he'd never known to want until he had it. Years later, when Korg was a grown orc and one of the most respected healers in all the territories, he asked Grakar a question. Papa, do you ever regret that I didn't become a warrior? They were sitting in the healing house, watching through the window as young healers, both orc and human, worked together to help the sick and injured. Grakar thought about the question, really thought about it. No, he said finally. I regret that I ever wanted you to be. Because wanting you to be like me was wanting you to be less than you became. You're something better than a warrior, Korg. You're a healer, a teacher, a hope giver. Those are rarer, more valuable, more needed. But you were a great warrior. I was an adequate warrior. I swung an axe well and won battles. But you change lives. You give people back their futures. You take fear and turn it into hope. I could never do what you do. Never. And I'm so proud of you I can barely breathe sometimes. Korg smiled. Alara says the same thing, that you're proud of me. Alara is wise, which is why we keep her around. You keep her around because she's family. That too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world go by. A world that was slowly changing, where orcs and humans worked together more often, where healing was valued alongside fighting, where strength was measured in more ways than just physical power. It wasn't a perfect world. There was still conflict, still prejudice, still pain. But it was better, a little bit better every day, and that was enough. That night, Grakar returned to his chambers to find the wooden training stick, the one he'd carved 18 years ago for a son who would never use it as intended, sitting on his desk. Beside it was a note in Korg's handwriting. Thank you for making this. It didn't teach me to fight, but it taught me to stand. It taught me to walk. It taught me that tools can be more than they were meant to be. Just like people. Love, Korg. Grakar picked up the stick, held it, remembered the hopes he'd had when he carved it, remembered the pain of watching those hopes die, remembered learning that sometimes what you lose makes room for something better than you'd imagined. This stick had been meant to make his son a warrior. Instead, it had helped him become a healer, not a failure of purpose, a transformation of it, just like Grakar himself had transformed. From a warrior who thought strength meant never needing anyone, to a father who knew that the strongest thing he'd ever done was ask a human servant for help. He placed the stick back on his desk, next to his battle-worn axe. 2 tools, 2 symbols, 2 different kinds of strength, both necessary, both valuable, both beautiful in their own way. Outside he could hear Alara and Korg laughing together as they worked in the healing house, could hear Mara humming her endless lullabies in the kitchens, could hear Thorgrim bellowing something about dinner being ready and why was everyone so slow about arriving. Home, family, not the one he'd planned, the one he'd been given, the one that had saved him. Grakar smiled. After all these years, after all the battles and victories and losses, he'd finally figured out what warriors spent their whole lives looking for. Not glory, not fame, not the thrill of victory. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong, with exactly the people who need you, being exactly who you're meant to be. And sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. Sometimes the bravest warriors are the ones who choose to heal instead of harm, who choose to build instead of destroy, who choose love over rage, patience over pride, and family over everything. Blood makes you orc, but love makes you family. And family, real family, is the strongest thing in the world. If you've been moved by this story, please like this video and subscribe to Orc-Bound Tales for more emotional fantasy stories. Drop a comment below sharing what strength means to you. We read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's fighting their own battle, share it with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay strong, in whatever way strength means for you.